Thank you everyone for being here to attend my presentation today. And I'd like to thank UTK IT chapter to give me a chance to present my work about light rail and streetcar safety in the United States. Today I will be sharing the findings of one of our recent publications, a longitudinal analysis of light rail and streetcars in the United States, which was published recently in the Journal of Transportation Record. I have the details of the paper here if anyone wants to take a look at the paper. Before I start, I would like to thank Dr. Beckwood, which was the co-author of this study, as well as the Cooperative Science Centers for Road Safety for funding this study, as well as Professor Eric Dunbar from Florida Atlantic University, who is the principal investigator for this project. Today's presentation will have background and motivation, prior research, our study objectives, and the data methodology we used, then results and conclusion, and finally limitations and some areas for future research. Before I start, in this analysis we'll be considering both light rail and streetcar. And light rail and streetcars, they have a lot of similarities, and a lot of people consider them the same mode. In fact, like National Transit Database (NTD) considered them one mode till 2011. However, they have some differences between them, although they have many similarities. Here I try to highlight like the main differences between light rail and streetcars. Like light rail generally have multiple caltrains, higher speeds, longer route lengths, and the stops they have 0.5 to mile distance different apart, and then dedicated right of way, more developed stations and platform. But mainly, if we consider the main differences, generally higher light rail have higher speeds and more dedicated right of way. So why we are doing this analysis? So in the recent years, like many cities in the United States, they have launched new light rail systems or streetcar systems or expanded their current service, which resulted in 61% increase in vehicle revenue miles nationwide in the period 2006 to 2016. However, if we look at the fatality rate per billion passengers mile traveled, we can see these two modes, the light rail and streetcars, have higher fatality rate compared to other transit modes. Like light rail have 15.2, and streetcars have 9.85 fatality per billion passengers mile traveled, compared to about 5 fatalities for other modes, which like heavy rail or bus rapid transit. And then this even like the average transit fatality rate is 5. So we were interested to see like why we are seeing this difference between light rail and streetcars compared to other transit. And before we go, I would like to mention two things. The first thing, we are not saying these two systems are not safe and cities should not expand them or introduce new systems. We are just saying these two systems have higher fatality rate compared to other transit systems, and we want to explore why. And the other thing we want to mention, this study did not consider comparing transit to automobiles, because there is a prior study that considered crash rate, comparing crash rate between transit and automobiles, and found that transit have like 10th the rate of automobiles. So here the focus is transit and mainly light rail and streetcars. So as in every research, the first step you do is prior research, and we look like in the prior literature, and we found like there is numerous number of studies, international studies, mainly from Australia, which has like one of the biggest streetcar systems in the world. Many studies, they looked at streetcar crash frequency, they looked at the safety impact of signal and lane priorities, they looked at the safety of platform stations in Australia, and many of these studies have very interesting findings. However, if we looked at the United States, we see that there were very limited number of prior studies, and the most relevant study was a TCRP report published in 1996, and that report showed that to 8% of light rail crashes occurred in shared right-of-way. Therefore, we see that like this report, although it's a very interesting report, but it's like more than 20 or almost 50 years now also. And since then, there have been many new systems, many expansions to the current system. So we wanted to look at the current trends in light rail and streetcar safety. So we developed the objective of our study that we will be exploring the collisions, the injuries, and the fatalities in the United States for the period from period 2002 to 2017. And the reasons we look at this period, like this is the period that NTD started asking agencies that receive federal funding to report their statistics, which include operational and safety statistics to the Federal Transit Authority. So as I said, NTD is like most of the one of the most reliable databases, and it's the main source that we use in this study. NTD has many databases that we use in this study. One of the first database that we use, which we got most of the data, is called the Safety and Security database. This safety and security has data about the number of collisions, the number of injuries, the number of fatalities, the number of vehicles revenue mile, the number of unlinked passenger trips, the vehicle operated maximum services for each transit system for each city in the United States. So it's a huge database, and it has a lot of information. So this was the main data source that we use. However, we also used some other source databases from the NTD, like the transitway mileage database, which has the right-of-way details of each system, like number of shared right-of-way, number of exclusive right-of-way, number of at-grade crossing, etc. Also, we looked at NTD station database, which has the number of stations for each system. So using these different databases, we were able to get data for 35 cities nationwide that had light rail or streetcar systems. So here, this is system, a map that shows the systems that operated light rail or streetcar in the period of the analysis. And as we can see, in the blue dot shows the cities that has light rail, which were 17 cities. And then the orange one shows the streetcar, which were 13 cities. And then there were 5 cities that have operated post modes in the period of the analysis. So here we'll be discussing the methods that we followed. So the first thing I have to mention here, as I said, like light rail and streetcar were considered the same mode until 2011. So therefore, we have to consider that in our analysis. Therefore, we did two-part method to analyze this collisions and injuries of light rail. The first one is descriptive statistics, and then the second one we did a multi-level negative binomial regression. So even the descriptive statistics, we looked at 2 time periods. The first one, we looked at the whole period, which 2002 to 2017. And in this case, we looked at light rail. We considered light rail and streetcar as one mode to see the general trends, because for the period 2002 to 2011, they were considered one mode. So we said like, okay, let's look at the general trend. And then for the shorter period, which is 2012 to 2017, we have their data different separately. So we looked at the different trends for each mode, and we compared them. And then for these two analysis, we explored collisions, injuries, and fatalities. Then in the second part, which is a multi-level negative binomial regression, we considered them as one mode. And this is because of the data limitation. Like we have about 10 years of data that were combined, so we were not able to separate each of them. We didn't estimate models for the period 2012 to 2017 because the sample size was small, and then we will think that that might affect the model accuracy. And then we estimated a negative binomial regression models for collisions and injuries, but we did not for fatalities, which I will be discussing later why we did not estimate models for fatalities. So for the multilevel binomial regression, so we use this approach because of two reasons. So our data was we had an over dispersed count data, therefore we chose the negative binomial regression, and then we used the multi-level approach to account for unobserved heterogeneity. And then here, when we are exploring this data, we are using panel data because we have multiple cities, like around 35 cities in the analysis, and then we are exploring them for many years, and therefore we have like for each city different observations. Therefore, we use this multi-level approach. So another thing to note here, as I mentioned, there's a lot of new systems that were introduced during the period of the analysis. Therefore, we went further and we had two panel data sets. The first one is a balanced data set, balanced panel, and the second one is unbalanced panel. So, and the difference is the unbalanced model, we considered every city that had operated light rail or streetcar during the period of the analysis. The other panel data set, which was the panel data set, this balanced data set had data from 19 cities. And these 19 cities had continuously operated light rail or streetcar during the whole period of the analysis. So in the reason we had this subset of the data, we wanted to see that if there is any different trends between cities that have continuous operation of light rail compared to cities that introduced light rail recently. And here are the descriptive statistics of these two different panel data set. And as we can see, in the balanced panel data set, we see that the number of collisions per year is slightly higher compared to the unbalanced data set. And similarly, the number of injuries is slightly higher. And similarly, we see the vehicle of operated maximum service is slightly higher. The reason we think that like most of the new cities probably are introducing small systems, and then compared to the prior existing systems, and they have like less exposure and they are less popular, so they are experiencing less collisions and less injuries per year compared to the cities that have very old systems, and they have been operating for more than 15 years. Then I will directly to the results, and then the results I will be discussing them in three parts. The first one will be collisions, then I will discuss the injuries, and finally I will discuss the fatalities. So here, as we can see, during the period 2002 to 2017, there were 5,400 collisions, light rail and streetcar collisions together, and we can see that 48% of these collisions were collisions with motor vehicles. So we see that this is the highest portion. Another thing we can notice here, there is like about 31% collisions with others, which include buses, animals, and other things that we were not able to explore because there was not enough details in the database that we used to explore them. But this is one of the things that we think future studies should explore them more. Also related to looking at the collisions with 12 to 2017. As we can see here, we see that there was 1,100 light rail collision compared to 3 300 streetcar collisions. But then the interesting thing when we look at the categories of these collisions, we see that for the streetcars, about 3/4 of the collisions were with motor vehicles, which is is higher than light rail, which had only about 54% of the collisions with motor vehicle. Also, if we look at the portion of collisions that were with person, we see that for light rail, 42% of the collisions were with person compared to only 19% of streetcar collisions were with person. Here are the results of the multi-level negative binomial regression, and we estimated models for the balanced and the unbalanced panel data, as I said, to see if there is any differences between the new systems compared to the old systems. And as we can see from this table, we see that the number of at-grade crossing is significant positive predictor of number of collisions, which indicates that the number of at-grade crossing is associated, higher number of at-grade crossing is associated with higher number of expected collisions. Similarly, we can see the same results with the mixed right of way, and similarly the speed and the vehicle operated at maximum service. So and all of these results are expected since the number of at-grade crossing increase the conflict points. So more at-grade crossings are expected to have more conflict points, and similarly the mixed right operation in mixed right of way will result in higher exposure for light rail and streetcar. And the other thing we see here, the results for the balanced panel model and the unbalanced panel, they look very similar, and we don't see any differences between the balanced and the unbalanced panel. Okay. The second part of the results, I will be presenting the findings from the analysis of the injuries, and we can see that there were 14,000 injuries for light rail and street cars during the period of the analysis. 40% of them were with passengers. Then also we can see that 30% of the injuries were people waiting or leaving. So most of these injuries were to the users of the systems while on board or waiting for the rail. Similar to the collisions, we compared the light rail and streetcars injuries. We see that the light rail were 5,500 compared to only 1,000 injuries for streetcar. But then when we looked at the portions, surprisingly, we see that the number of the portion of people who injured waiting or leaving light rail were 42% compared to only 11% of streetcar injuries. This result was surprising because, as I said in the beginning, light rail stations are expected to have platforms and to be more developed compared to light air. But this result was one of the surprising findings, that we see higher portion of light rail injuries compared to streetcars. Here are the results of the negative binomial regression, and here we estimated different models for the balanced and the unbalanced, and for each of them we have two models. The difference between them, like one of them did include unlinked passenger trips, while the other did not include the unlinked passenger trips, and we see that adding the unlinked passenger trips did not change the results of the model. Similar to the to prior studies about injuries, I mean, both in transit and automobiles, we see that higher speeds are associated with higher number of injuries. And also we see that vehicles operated at maximum services are associated with higher number of injuries. This is due to higher exposure. However, here between the balanced and the unbalanced model, we see that the mixed right-of-way miles is only significant predictor in the balanced panel, but not in the unbalanced panel. And one of the things that we think this might be the reason is, as I mentioned in the beginning, these new systems are likely to be smaller systems, and they have less exposure compared to the prior system. So we think that might be the reason that we are not seeing the mixed right-of-way as a significant predictor for light rail and streetcar injuries. Finally, here we will be looking at the light rail and streetcar fatalities, and we see that for light rail, the result shows the light rail fatalities. We see that there were 250 light rail fatalities during the period 2012-2015. And surprisingly, we see that 28% of these fatalities were suicide, which was surprising for us. We see that we didn't expect that almost third of the fatalities will be suicide. And then this is the reason, like, we did not estimate negative binomial regression, because we think that suicide has nothing to do with the operation characteristics of the system. It has to do with some other things that are not related to this, to the system characteristics. So also we see that 14% of the fatalities were people waiting or leaving, which aligns with the findings from the injuries analysis that showed a lot of 42% of light rail injuries were people waiting or leaving, which suggests that there might be some issues at light rail, some safety issues at light rail stations. Also, it should be noted that streetcars had only 7 fatalities in the period from 2012 to 2017. Therefore, we did not further explore them because there were only 7 fatalities of them. Another thing to mention here, we compared the light rail and the collisions rate between light rail and streetcar, and we found that the streetcar have higher rate of collisions, but then lower rate of fatalities. And then the reason we think that is probably to lower speed of streetcars, which will result in lower severity if any crashes occur. Then finally, from this, we have our 3 conclusions from this analysis. We see that the majority of light rail and streetcars collisions occurred in mixed right-of-way or near at-grade crossings, as indicated by the findings from the multi-level negative binomial regression. Also, we see that light rail injuries are more likely to occur at near or at the light rail stations, and this is, as I mentioned, this is a surprising result, as we anticipate that light rail stations to be more developed, have platform, and platforms are generally expected to reduce collisions and injuries, but this was not the case here in this analysis. And finally, we see that suicide is the leading cause of light rail fatalities, which as it represents like 28% of light rail fatalities, which lead us to another area of research. Like, I think this research should include people from engineering as well as from other areas. That's why we are seeing this high portion of suicide fatalities in light rail. Finally, here I'll be just mentioning some of the limitation of this study. So the first limitation of our analysis is the multivariate analysis considers light rail and streetcar as one mode, since NTD defines them as one mode, but then as when we compare them for the other period of, from 2012 to 2017, we see some differences. So we think that in future, as more data become available, future research should explore them separately and estimate regression models or multivariate models for each of these two modes. Also, as I mentioned, in the collisions, we saw that like there's a lot of collisions coded as others. So, and we were not able to explore this other category in details because there were some changes in the collisions and injuries categories in the period of the analysis. So as more reliable data became available, I think this is also an area for future research, in addition to the safety of light rail stations and how to improve them. This study showed that there's a lot of injuries occurring at light rail stations, and I think light rail operators should explore them more and see why, what are the reasons behind this and how they can improve them. And the last thing, as I mentioned, this should include other people from the cities as well as mental health experts to respond to the light rail suicides. Thank you. And any questions?
Thank you so much, Abubakr. That's a great presentation. So we will now open questions to people on the line. If you have one, feel free to bring in a question. It's a good opportunity to, ask questions related to the specific like research domain, or the general process of submitting a paper, getting reviewers' feedback, things like that. And that is actually one of the intentions why we are doing this. So if you have questions, please ask now. Anyone? Don't let me don't always let me other questions. Okay. Anyone wanna ask a question? Okay. I think I will ask the question. I have two questions. The first one is I think maybe you have that in the paper. But do you have like a distribution of, for example, for the fatality or for the injuries? Do they usually, are the majority of them occur at night or during daytime? Or do you have like a idea of the distribution of that?
Unfortunately not, because the data that we use, it's an aggregate level data. It reports the number of annual collisions per system per city. So there is not much details about the temporal or the spatial distribution of them. Like we don't know when they occurred or where they occurred, but we know just the total number of collisions, injuries, or fatalities. So yeah, unfortunately, we were not able to do that, but this is an interesting area, like to see where are these collisions are happening and when. Yeah.
Yeah. Another question I have is you mentioned in your conclusion that the light rail system, they are more, we cannot say more dangerous, but it looks like there are more fatalities and injuries associated with light rails compared to streetcars. Do you think that the ridership may be a reason? Like, for example, if there are many people riding the light rails, but not so many riding the streetcar, then even for light rail, even they build a good platforms, maybe the platforms, they are not wide enough, they're not big enough, so that so that you always have people like, not in the platform but like walking around. Do you think that might be a reason that ridership is is affected?
Okay, that's a good point. So I think ridership will be a factor because more riders, probably higher exposures, probably if there is an collision or something like that, there will be more people involved in the collisions because of the higher capacity. But also I will think that there is other two things to consider here. The first one is suicide. And we see that like almost third of these light rail fatalities are suicides compared like there is no suicides in streetcars. And this leads us to the second one, which is speed. So speed in light rail is higher. So if any collision happens, there probably be more dangerous injuries that could lead to fatalities. But then in streetcars, the operation speeds are are lower compared to light rail. So even if there are collisions, more collisions in light rail, that might be they have lower severity, so they might not result in a death. So I think that also could be the reason behind we see higher fatalities on light rail.
Yeah, I think in general that if we are going to operate a system that carries passenger at a higher speed, then the higher the speed, we want to make sure that it's more separated, right, from the remaining traffic. Because I can see that a lot of this happen because not because of the driver of light rails or the streetcars. I think they are professionally trained. So like when things happen, they were able to react properly. I think a lot of this, and I could be wrong, I think that a lot of this, they are the faults of the other part. Like for example, some people they want to commit suicide, they just jump in the tracks, right? And there's no way preventing them. But I do see that if we make them more separated, then there's a higher chance of doing that. And on that note, I think maybe one thing that you can explore in the future is, for example, the question will be, are the newer systems safer than the old ones? So, for example, if we compare like the system that built after 2010, I'm not sure how many are those, but if we like have like a time comparison, so maybe the newer system they were able to do it better. But you know, just a thought. So yeah, no need to write a paper on it. Just a
Yeah, I think
just a
that would
thought.
be
Yeah.
yeah, I think that would be interesting. So especially for the thing. So here we see that there is more injuries in light rail stations. So maybe we can look at the stations of the newer systems compared to the stations of the old systems. Maybe in the new stations there are some better fencing or something like that that could improve safety. So I think yeah, that would be a really good area for future research.